I would have been fine with cute little doughball guy. Magical realism. I'm into that kind of stuff. I like Scott Pilgrim.
It's like Pinocchio, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is don't be a helicopter parents.
It's weird, though, when the dumpling grows a douchey goatee. And I understand the mother not wanting a dumpling to play soccer. It dented him. He could be squished in soccer. I don't understand this as a metaphor for a real boy.
It's all the anxiety of the mother. It's her summing up her feelings as she lost her boy. I don't think any of this is actually happening. Again, these people are all self-medicating with food. They're eating pork buns.
You're saying she's eating her feelings at the end when she eats the dumpling.
Yes, literally. Yeah, it's very Oedipal at that point.
Plus, I don't feel like her problem is with her son who got engaged to a white woman is maybe not around as much. What's going on in that marriage?
Yeah, the husband's at the beginning eating, and then we never see him again with Dumpling Boy.
That's the real problem. She needs to not worry about the bow. She needs to worry about her husband and why they're not relating to each other anymore. But father and son, mother and daughter, those are the relationships that are primary to these kinds of animated movies. So that's what they're going to focus on here. And I'm presuming that this is somewhat autobiographical, that this was made by Domi Shi. I think maybe one of the first female animators that got to make one of these. So that's a plus.
Yeah, I'm for that. And I don't know that a silent film is exactly the best place to address racism. I don't really look at color, especially in animated films. It wasn't until near the end I'm like, wait, the mama hates the daughter-in-law because she's white? She's a horrible woman.
Yeah, well, she's outside the culture. And again, I think mothers want their children to idolize them on some level. I think there's some truth here. It's just, to me, Arnie, you called out that Incredibles is a Fantastic Four ripoff. I'm calling this little doughboy out as a Pillsbury ripoff. I have nothing to do with him. As soon as his face popped out, I'm like, you ripoff.
Okay, so 3 red arrows for the opening short.
Show up late to the screening is what we're saying.
Yeah, mild. I mean, I don't really care is probably a more accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of, that better not show up for Best Animated Short like a lot of these Pixar ones do.
That's what got me mad. I was like, that's going to walk away with an Oscar.
With a little goatee on the Oscar penciled in.
But anyway, yeah, Arnie, why don't you give them the plot to the real attraction here? We can find out all about Incredibles 2.
Incredibles 2 picks up right where the first one left off, with the superpowered family, Father Bob Parr, a.k.a. Mr. Incredible, wife Helen, a.k.a. Elastigirl. Shouldn't she be Elasta-Woman now? Isn't she liberated and old enough?
It's a little, still be using that girl moniker for her. Come on. Independent women, guys. Strong female protagonist.
Super fast son Dash and invisible daughter Violet fighting the Underminer, who's come to rob a bank. Underminer gets away, and as supers are still illegal, the department that provided the super relocation program is shut down. But telecom tycoon Winston DeVore, voiced by Bob Odenkirk, is a longtime superhero fan and has a plan to make them legal again. Elastigirl will fight crime in the city of New Ubrum and prove supers are still useful and needed. She does this equipped with tech provided by Winston's sister Evelyn, voiced by Catherine Keener. This leaves Bob at home playing Mr. Incredible Mom, helping Violet with boy troubles and adjusting to baby Jack's developing powers, which includes turning into a demon, firing lasers from his eyes, turning his body to fire, making copies of himself, and using all of this to fight a local raccoon. Meanwhile, in New Ubrum, Elastigirl has uncovered a new supervillain, the Screenslaver, who is able to hypnotize people to do his bidding through the use of video screens. Elastigirl uncovers that Screenslaver is actually Evelyn, who disagrees with her brother's hero worship and uses her hypnosis to make it seem like the supers are trying to kill ambassadors from across the globe. Evelyn gets Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl to wear the goggles and do her bidding, but Dash and Violet save their parents, and the four fight off Evelyn and her hypnotized super slaves. With the help of Buddy Frozone, they save the ambassadors and capture Evelyn. And with this, supers are made legal again in over 100 countries across the globe as credits roll.
Here's my question, because this does pick up literally where the original film ends. What was your assumption about the status of superheroes going into this? Because, again, it's only implied, so I gotta blame myself for thinking this. The fact that there's gonna be this huge big fight at the beginning here and supers are still vilified, they're still illegal, was a little bit of a surprise to me. I figured by the end of that last film, we see the family team up to fight the Underminer. Okay, they're accepted now. People aren't gonna be fighting them.
No, I didn't think that, partly because they encouraged Dash to come in second. They were still playing by the rules of the day. They did not want to be singled out for being extraordinary.
And I'm really glad I rewatched part 1 for part 2 because I'm impressed. 14 years later, the animation has gotten a lot better. The detail, the shading. I have nothing but props for how this movie looks, but they keep to themselves. We're seeing a beginning where it's the exact same as the last one ended, but from a different point of view, because Violet had a crush on this boy in her class. Now we're going to see this entire Underminer attack from that point of view of Tony.
It's a real Batman v Superman situation where we get to see the destructive metropolis from Bruce Wayne's point of view now.
Again, you make a joke, but it's also worth pointing out other films are covering this stuff. In between Incredibles and Incredibles 2, anything you might want to say about what being a superhero is has probably been addressed in one of the 120 films about the subject that have come out.
That's what I liked about the originals. It's like, oh, we're going to take Alan Moore's Watchmen, where it's like this real gritty, realistic take on superheroes, and we're going to turn it into a Pixar film. Like, there is definitely those elements where we're going to ban superheroes because they're just destroying things and they have too much power and they're the actual villains. Yeah, seeing this 14 years later, trying to pretend no time has passed, I'll just say it is a little jarring because I'm just in a different place with thinking about superheroes at this point.
And they didn't have to do that, right? This family could have aged. We could have picked up at any given point, and it might have even been satisfying to see them having grown in their roles. That Violet, I mean, we already saw her being bold because she was the one that asked Tony out, but to really see how they've changed was an opportunity they decided not to take. Now, I understand this is common. The Simpsons, they've been on for 30 years and nothing has changed in that household. But I do think 14 years, you kind of do expect the characters to be different because you're different.
But I like that they're keeping it the same. I really do. I wouldn't want The Incredibles Awakens, you know? I wouldn't want the last Incredible where Mr. Incredible is throwing his super suit over his shoulder and he's all burned out.
What about, like, Dash has a family of his own and their grandparents?
I think going for the nostalgia is the right way to go. And they did say in interviews, you're able to do this because it's animation. Craig T. Nelson, he was in his 50s when he was doing the TV series Coach.
He's not looking great right now.
No, he is looking thin and very old.
Yeah, I'm worried about him.
In that little apology video at the beginning, but he sounds as good as ever. Holly Hunter sounds as good as ever. Everybody except the original boy voice of Dash was able to reprise their role, and that's because the Dash from part 1 was actually a prepubescent boy who is now in the workforce. He's probably almost 30, and so they had to find another prepubescent boy.
Right. And part of the appeal, you're right, is that they have an animation style that is very mod 60s, and they want to keep it in that era. That this is not an era like you and I live in. I mean, there are some of the luxury items, but they're presented as like steampunk or neo-futurism. It's the 50s, 60s vision of the future. Everyone doesn't have cell phones and they're not on the internet. It's not our world. They kept it in this specialized 60s mod world, right down to the Disney castle that opens.
Yeah, and going with that kind of 60s vibe, again, I haven't seen the original Incredibles for a while. Haven't seen it on the big screen since it came out. You guys just saw it on the big screen, so maybe it's true for the first one. The score, just those blaring horns, it just had a James Bond, Sean Connery era James Bond feel to me, this score as it would play. Just the horns were just so loud and it added to excitement. That's not a criticism. I really dug that. You know, talking about what genre is this? Yeah, it is kind of like a spy movie, and so I dug that element as well.
Yeah, it's Michael Giacchino. He's proving me wrong. He actually did themes here. He actually did notes and not just sounds.
Oh, this is the one you don't like. Okay.
Most of the time. But It was very reminiscent of the first one. I'll say, seeing this in IMAX, though, we stayed for the end credits. What if there's an end credit scene? And I just felt assaulted by the volume of those horns. I was telling Stuart, it was really painful.
My wife did say, why is this movie so loud? Why is the music so loud?
I only noticed it during the credits, but I'm leaning over to Stuart like, damn it, I don't need to know who their Windows support person is. This person does not need to be in the credits. Are you going to list their pizza delivery guy too? Why are the credits so long?
Yeah, they have some crazy credits in this one.
Indeed. But by picking up seconds after the last film ended, it means that we get a resolution, to a degree, for the Underminer. They have good names for the villains. I like the idea that the Underminer comes and destroys the foundations of banks, and then as those structures fall, he could just vacuum up the money. A good character. Surprised he's only used here from the opening. He's used here to demonstrate that Mr. Incredible is very sloppy.
I was waiting for him to come back.
He was a joke at the last one, though, because Fantastic Four, their very first villain in issue 1 was the Mole Man who came up from underground. He's a punchline. The fact that they continued with him at all was surprising. The fact that he gets away and never comes back, even more surprising.
I kept waiting for the third act, like Jack is going to somehow find him and burn him up or something. I don't know. I waited for that to be resolved. It's not going to be resolved. But again, I like this world. Like, they're going to have this huge chase with this giant drill and it destroys banks. And then the suits come along. They're like, oh, well, it's all covered by insurance. We don't need your guys' help. It would have been fine. I kind of like that real world stuff clashing with superheroes. But on the other hand, it does feel a little dated. We've had Civil War where we've had other movies tackled real world versus superhero worlds bumping against each other.
It's important to reassert, because as Jacob pointed out, you might think that they were celebrated at the end of the first film, because we were certainly cheering them on. But no, the world is still very much against this. And it's pointed out that, like, had they done nothing, the banks being insured, it actually would have worked out better because Mr. Incredible is so messy. That's really the problem. It's the perception that if you invite superheroes into the world, that they will destroy more than they will save.
Here, it does feel like gender politics are different 14 years later than the first one. I feel like, oh boy, here's the stereotypical oafish man. He's exactly as he was in part 1. He was very destructive. It's his destruction that caused supers to be put out in the first place, although he did save a guy's life, which was the first chink in the armor. But here, we're going to find out that Mr. Incredible is the problem, not the solution.
Right. And that's kind of tapping into things that are contemporary, things that they may not have even anticipated when they started this, but certainly we're in a groundswell of movement towards empowering women, moving them to positions of power, and really challenging a patriarchy that exploits them. And here, we like Mr. Incredible. I don't think that we would ever see the marriage as him intentionally diminishing and domesticating her. She was the one that wanted that. She fell in love with home life. You remember that first movie, she was the one that thought, hey, this is enough for me. I can find enough in this domestic life to be sustained. He was the one that had the wanderlust. Now they're going to flip that and show that Helen is a little bit of a hypocrite.
In the hotel, they have a interesting conversation, though, because maybe it's the politics of the day, but I found myself really drawn to the conversation between Bob and Helen. It's in the trailer. Helen says, to change the law, I have to break it. To save my family, I have to leave it. And they have this conversation about law versus lawlessness, where Helen doesn't want the job. She wants to obey the law. She thinks doing right is the law, a very statist opinion. But Bob says something that I've seen in many of my libertarian groups. Do you respect the law when the law is disrespectful?
I appreciate the conversation. The film doesn't do anything with it.
No.
If it would have done something with that, it would have been better. It's just an aside.
And, you know, like the first movie, you want to position the characters in the opposite direction of where they're going to go. If you remember in the first Incredibles, Bob in the opening documentary said something to the effect of, sometimes I wish the world would clean up after itself and I could take a break. Well, that becomes his nightmare for the movie, while Helen says, there's no way I'm staying home and not being super. And then, of course, she's the one that's domesticated. Here, they've done a very similar thing by having Helen, the one that is happy to obey the law, be the lawbreaker. So it's character positioning. But Is it best utilized in the story? Maybe not.
Here's my issue. That last film, it was about Bob, his midlife crisis, and we're going to focus on him. He's going to get this secret job fighting a big robot and doing superhero stuff, and it's focused on his story. And then you got the family. They're going to come along eventually. I feel like this one, hey, let's put the woman at the forefront, and she's going to be the superhero now doing the secret stuff. But a lot of this film is going to go back to Bob and be about him. Now he's got to be Mr. Mom, and isn't it tough for a guy to do girl work? I feel like they want to put a girl at the forefront, a woman at the forefront of the film, but we're still going to spend a lot of time with that dude and seeing the troubles he's going to go through.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but Mr. Incredible is the favorite character, right? I mean, he's my favorite character when I think about the original, partly because he was the one that had the most storyline. It was really his arc to recognize that he could still be super in middle age. And now, with him being marginalized, this story doesn't really have a lot of use